You just gonna set it up. You flying. I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. Open your eyes. The sun is shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. See, better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Yes, good afternoon, family. This is Brother Jegna bringing you another Afrocentricity Bookman show. I hope you guys had a great week. I'm here again, don't forget, every Sunday between 4 and 6 p.m. I must remind you that this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. Glass Are Us, 7307 Sisters Road, N15 5NH. Please go to Glass Are Us for all of your glazing needs. So you can get them on 0208 800 6663. That is 0208 800 6663. So please go to Glass Are Us for glass repairs, double glazing, shelving, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, balustrades, balconies. Please go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs. If you mention the Afrocentricity Bookman show, you'll get a 10% discount. So that is Glass Are Us, 7307 Sisters Road, N15 5NH. Again, all your glazing needs, 0208 800 6663. So guys, I hope you had a good week. There are a few events happening very soon. So let me tell you the first one, I must tell you. This is being put on by Afrocentricity International UK. And this is happening on Sunday, the 20th of October at the Ma'at Centre, 366A High Road, Tottenham, N17 9HT. So again, on Sunday, the 20th of October at the Ma'at Centre, 366A High Road, Tottenham, N17 9HT. Dr. Malefi Katiasenti is here, and Dr. Amma Mazama. So again, Dr. Malefi Ketiasanti and Dr. Amazan. So Dr. Malefi Ketiasanti, who he wrote the book Afrocentricity. It's a powerful ideology which this show really follows. So I hope you can make attendance to that one there. And also, you must not forget that we've got the quiz night happening very soon as well. So let me get the details for you. Our Legacy Quiz Night will be happening on the 19th of October. And this is at the Prospect Hall, 28 Prospect Road, and this is Woodford, 1G8 7NA, 7 till 10:30. And our Legacy Quiz Night, it's teams of 6. So get your teams of 6 in, book it's £10 a head. You get excellent quiz, you get hot food, you get drinks, as all included as well. There's raffle prize and the awards for the winners as well. So our Legacy's October fundraising quiz night will be happening on the 19th of October, which is a Saturday, 7 till 10:30. Please come along to that one. It is Prospect Hall, 28 Prospect Road, Woodford, 1G8 7NA. So I'll mention that again later on. So what are we reading? We are reading the great book by Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mars. We are continuing to read that one there. We're on page 131 now. We're going to continue from last week. Background for the book is that really he's a psychoanalyst. He's a psychotherapist, and he really examined the effect of the African mind, the black mind, when it's caught within the confines of a Eurocentric world, and the effects which happens to the black mind when he does not have, or she does not have, information about the African world. Because when you're caught within this European paradigm, clearly there's a lot of negativity in there. Because as you know, I'm sure if you check a encyclopedia and check the word black, I think there will be only one positive. There'll be 100 words in there and all negative. Maybe one positive, because if you're in a black in a bank, that means you're in profit, yeah? You're not negative. But apart from that, it's all negativity, yeah? So, Black Skin, White Mars by Frantz Fanon, he analysed the effects of the African mind kind of stuck inside the European world. So I'm going to continue. We're on page 131. So this delirium of orgasm was unattainable. She could not experience it. So she avenged herself by losing herself in speculation. One thing must be mentioned in this connection. A white woman who has had a Negro, a black lover, finds it difficult to return to white men. Or so at least it is believed, particularly by white men. And this is speech marks. Who knows what they can give a woman? He indeed does not know. Certainly, they do not. On this subject, I cannot overlook this comment by Etiemble. So this is a quote, no doubt from a book or article. Racial jealousy produces the crimes of racism. To many white men, the black is simply the marvelous sword that once it has transfixed their wives, leaves them forever transfigured. My statistical source have been able to provide me with no documentation on this point. I have, however, known some Africans, some black people, some white women who have had blacks, and finally some Negro women who have been with white lovers. I have heard enough confidences from all of them to be able to deplore the fact that Mr. Cornell applies his talents to the rejuvenation of a fable in which the white man will always be able to find a specious argument, shameful, dubious, and thus doubly effective. An endless task, the cataloguing of reality. We accumulate facts, we discuss them, but with every line that is written, with every statement that is made, one has the feeling of incompleteness. Attacking J.P. Sartre, Gebel Arbusier says, this anthology, which puts Antillians, Guineans, Senegalese and Malagasys on the same footing, creates a deplorable confusion. In this way, it states the cultural problem of the overseas countries by detaching it from the historical and social reality of each of them, from the national characteristics and the varying conditions imposed on each of them by the imperialist exploitation and oppression. Thus, what Sartre wrote, simply by plunging into the depths of his memory, As a former slave, the black man asserts that suffering is the lot of man, and that it is no less undeserved on that account. Did he take into consideration what that might mean to Hova, a Moor, a Tuareg, a PL, or a Bantu of the Congo or Ivory Coast? The objection is valid. It applies to me as well. In the beginning, I wanted to confine myself to the Antilles, but regardless of the consequences, dialectic took the upper hand, and I was compelled to see the Antillean is first of all a Negro. Nevertheless, it would be impossible to overlook the fact that there are Negroes whose nationality is Belgian, French, English. There are also Negroes republics. But how can one claim to have got hold of the essential when such facts as these demand one's recognition? The truth is that the Negro race has been scattered, that it can no longer claim unity. When El Duce troops invaded Ethiopia, obviously Duce, that's the Italians, under the Duce was obviously the what's the word I'm looking for? When there's no government. Anyway, El Duce's troops, his name will come to me shortly. El Duce's troops invaded Ethiopia. A movement of solidarity arose among the men of color. But though one or two airplanes were sent from America to the invaded country, not a single black man made up any practical move. The Negro has a country. He takes his place in the Union or Commonwealth. Every description should be put on the level of discrete phenomenon. But here again, we are driven out to infinite perspectives. In the universal situation of the Negro, there is ambiguity, which is, however, resolved in his concrete existence. This, in a way, places him beside the Jew. Almost all the arguments I have just cited, I come back to one fact. Wherever he goes, the Negro remains a Negro. So let me interject here. Many people don't understand. The point he's just making this is that obviously the black man, the Negro, yeah, he can be a Belgian, he could be an Italian, French, English, but he's always an African. And I agree with that, just similar to the Peter Tosh record, no matter where he comes from. We have to understand the difference between nationality and ethnicity, nationality and blood, nationality and kin. I could be a Belgian national. I could be a Chinese national. I could be an American national, USA. But I'm still African. No matter what my nationality is, I'm still an African. My nationality can be removed. You've seen those people who went to fight war in Iraq, and Britain said, their passport, they say, is not a right. So they've taken away their nationality. Said you can stay where you are in Iraq, Iran, wherever you are. We don't give a damn. You can stay out where you are. So your nationality can be removed. However, I'm an African. That can never be removed. My blood, my family line. So we need to understand the concept of national. People say, "Oh, I'm British. I'm British." But what does that mean? They can revoke your Britishness. But if you're an African, it can never be revoked. Not even God can revoke your Britishness. Yeah. So there is, in a way, places him beside. This, in a way, places him beside the Jew. Almost all the arguments I've just cited, I come back to one fact. Wherever he goes, the Negro remains a Negro. In some countries, the Negro has entered into the culture. As we have already indicated, it would be impossible to ascribe too much importance to the way in which white children establish contact with the reality of the Negro. In the United States, for example, even if he does not live in the South, where he naturally encounters Negroes concretely, a white child is introduced to them through the myth of Uncle Remus. In brackets, in France, there is a parallel of Le Casse de Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Miss Sally And Master John's little boy listens with a mixture of fear and admiration to the tales of Brer Rabbit. To Bernard Wolfe, this ambivalence towards a white man is the dominant factor in the white American psychology. Relying on the life of Joel Chandler Harris, Wolfe goes so far as to show that the admiration corresponds to a certain identification of the white man with the black. It is perfectly obvious what these stories are about. Brer Rabbit gets into conflicts with almost all the other animals in creation. And naturally, he is always the winner. These stories belong to the oral tradition of the plantation Negroes. Therefore, it is relatively easy to recognize the Negro in this remarkably ironic and wary disguise as a rabbit. In order to protect themselves against their own unconscious machoism, he impels them to rapturous admiration of the black, in brackets, rabbit's prowess. The whites have tried to drain those stories of their aggressive potential. This is how they have been able to tell themselves that the black man makes all the animals behave like a lower order of human intelligence, the kind that the Negro himself can understand. The black man naturally feels that he is in closer touch with the lower animals than with the white man, who is so far superior to him in every respect, which is of course rubbish. Others have advanced the theory with straight faces that these stories are not reactions to the conditions imposed on the Negro in the United States, but they are simply survivals of Africa. So this is true because Brer Rabbit, which means brother rabbit, comes from West Africa, no doubt Central Africa, yeah? These are kind of folk tales, what they've told. So, and it's just like a Nancy, which comes from West Africa as well. He's kind of a trickster, yeah? But they always use their brains, yeah? They always get one up over people. They use proverbs, yeah? But Brer Rabbit, we know it well if you're familiar with Bugs Bunny. The European American took Brer Rabbit and created Bugs Bunny. Think about it, the trickster rabbit, who always gets his one up on other people. So Brer Rabbit actually comes from African culture, comes from West African folktales, and they created Bugs Bunny from Brer Rabbit. So it's not really, they're saying here that maybe he comes from the mind of the plantation Negro. He comes from Africa, where the root of the folktales comes from. So let me continue. Wolfe gives us a clue to such interpretations. This is a quote from Wolfe. On the basis of all the evidence, Brer Rabbit is an animal because the Negro must be an animal. See, so rubbish is coming to. The rabbit is an outlander because the Negro must be branded as an outlander, down to his chromosomes. Ever since the slavery began, his Christian and democratic guilt as a slave owner has led the Southerner to describe the Negro as an animal, an interchangeable African, whose nature was determined by his protoplasm, by his African genes. If the black man found himself relegated to the limbo of mankind, he was the victim not of Americans, but of the organic inferiority of his jungle ancestors. So you see the sickness of the white mind, how they portray Africans. Sickness, man. And sadly, that sickness is still there today. But this is what this book is around. When an African mind is enclosed within this sickness, you can read here, what is that going to do to the African mind? This is how inferiority is put into the African. Earlier in this book, they sort of said that it's natural for him. It's natural for an African sees a European to feel inferior. What a load of rubbish. Africans, when they first met Europeans, they felt sorry for them. They said, look at these people with the pale skin. These people must be really sick. But the sad thing is they didn't understand how really sick their mind is. I continue. To the Southerner, refuse to see in these stories the aggression that the Negro infused into them. But Wolfe says their complicit, their compiler, Harris, was a psychopath. So there's a quote here. He was especially adept at this task because he was filled to the bursting point with pathological racial obsessions over and above those of the tormented, the South, and to a lesser degree, all of white America. Indeed, for Harris, as well as for many other white Americans, the Negro seemed to be, in every respect, the opposite of his own anxious self. Unworried, gregarious, voluble, muscularly relaxed, never a victim of boredom, or passive, unashamedly exhibition, exhibition, exhibitionist, devoid of self-pity in his condition of concentrated suffering and exuberant. So again, some European description of the African. But Harris always had the feeling of being handicapped. Therefore, Wolfe sees him as frustrated, but not after the classic schema. It was the very essence of the man that made it possible for him to exist in the natural way of the Negro. No one had barred him from it. It was just impossible for him. Not prohibited, but unrealizable. And it is because the white man feels himself frustrated by the Negro that he seeks to, in turn, to frustrate the black, binding him with the prohibitions of all kinds. And here again, the white man is the victim of his unconscious. Let us listen again to Wolfe, says another quote. The Remus stories are a monument to the ambivalence of the South. Harris, the archetype of the Southerner, went in search of the Negro's love and claimed that he had won it, in brackets, the grin of Uncle Remus. But at the same time, he was striving for the Negro's hatred, in brackets, Brer Rabbit, and he reveled in it, in an unconscious orgy of machoism, very possibly punishing himself for not being the black man, the stereotype of the black man, the prodigious giver. It is not possible for the white South, and perhaps the majority of white America, to behave the same way in their relations with the Negro. There is a quest for the Negro. The Negro is in demand. One cannot get along without him. He is needed, but only if he is made palatable in a certain way. Unfortunately, the Negro knocks down the system and breaks it to treaties. Will the white man rise in resistance? No, he will adjust the situation. This fact, Wolfe says, explains why many books dealing with racial problems become bestsellers. A quote here, certainly no one is compelled to read stories of Negroes who make love to white women. Deep are the roots, strange fruit and Uncle Remus, of whites who learn that they are Negroes, King's Blood Royal and Lost Boundaries. These must be books. The Uncle Remus, of white men strangled by a black man, native son, if he hollers let him go, Uncle Remus. We can package the Negro's grin and market it on a grand scale in our popular culture as a cloak of his machoism. The caress sweetens the blow, and as Uncle Remus shows, here the interplay of the races is in large part unconscious. The white man is no more aware of his machoism when he's being titillated by the subtle content of the stereotype grin than the Negro is aware of his sadism when he transformed the stereotype into a cultural bludgeon, perhaps less. In the United States, as we have seen, or as we can see, the Negro makes stories in which it becomes possible for him to work off his aggression. The white man's unconscious justifies this aggression and gives its worth by turning it on himself, this reproducing the classic schema of machoism. We can now stake out a marker for the majority of white men. The Negro represents the sexual instincts in its raw state. The Negro is this incarnation of a genital potency beyond all moralities and prohibitions. The women among the whites, by a genuine process of induction, invariably view the Negro as the keeper of the impalpable gate that opens into the realms of orgies, of bacchanals, of delirious sexual sensations. We have shown that reality destroys all these beliefs, but they all rest on the level of the imagined. In any case, on that of the paralogism. The white man who ascribes the malefic influence to the black is regressing on the intellectual beliefs, since, As we have shown, his perception is based on a mental age of 8 years old. The comic books. Is there not a concurrent regression to and fixations of the pregenital levels of sexual development? Self-castration? The Negro is taken as a terrifying penis. Passivity, justifying itself by the recognition of the superiority of the black man in terms of his sexual capacity. So this is really just showing here really how the European, when he stands alongside the black man, he feels inferior. He shows his power through violence, but it's really just masking his inferiority, or should we say his fragility. The European knows, I'm interjecting here, when he stands next to the black man, that he feels reduced. He kind of shows his superiority by using violence against us. As we just seen in the chapters, they keep on talking about the aggressiveness of the African, but how many people were killed in the Caribbean before the Africans were even brought there? How many Africans were killed in the so-called triangular slave trade, which is really a race war? Hundreds of millions. People of the Americas wiped out. People of Australia wiped out. So they always, I think what they do, they really turn themselves what they're really like and blame other people for it. Oh, those black people are so violent. But who exterminated millions of people? I think you'll find that Africa has not done that. Extermination. 6 million Jews, 20 million people in the so-called Second World War, which is really just a great European war. I'll continue. There are, for instance, men who go to houses in order to be beaten by Negroes, passive homosexuals who insist on black partners. Another solution might be this. There is first of all a sadist. Sadist aggression towards a black man, followed by a guilt complex because of the sanction against such behavior of the democratic culture of the country in question. This aggression is then tolerated by the Negro, whence machoism. But I should be told, your schema is invalid. It does not contain the elements of classic machoism. Perhaps, indeed, this situation is not classic. In any event, it is the only way in which to explain the machoistic behavior of the white man. From a heuristic point of view, without attributing any reality to it, I should like to propose an explanation of the fantasy. In italics, the Negro is raping me. From the work of Helene Deutsch and Marie Bonaparte, both of whom took up and in a way carried to the ultimate conclusion Freud's ideas of female sexuality. We have learned that, alternatively, clitoral and clitoral vaginal and finally pure vaginal, a woman having retained, more or less commingled, her libido is a passive conception, and her aggression, having surmounted her double Oedipus complex, proceeds through her biological and psychological growth and arrives at the assumption of her role, which is achieved by neuropsychic integration. We cannot, however, ignore certain failures or certain fixations. Corresponding to the clitoral stage, there is an active Oedipus complex. Although according to Marie Bonaparte, it is not the sequence but a coexistence of the active and the passive. The desexualization of aggression in a girl is less complete than in a boy. The clitoris is perceived as a diminished penis, but going beyond the concrete, the girl clings only to the quality. She apprehends reality in a qualitative terms. In her is the little boy. There will be impulses directed at the mother. She too would like to be disemboweled by the mother. You can see in the European psyche, there's a lot of sickness there. Our question then is whether, side by side with the final achievement of femininity, there is not some survival of this infantile fantasy. Too strong an aversion to women against the rough games of men is, furthermore, a suspicious indication of male protest and excessive bisexuality. It is possible that such a woman will be clitoral. Here is my own view on the matter. First, the little girl sees a sibling rival beaten by the father. A libido aggressive. At this stage between the ages of 5 and 9, the father, who is now the pole of her libido, refuses in a way to take up the aggression that the little girl's unconscious demands of him. At this point, lacking support, this free-floating aggression requires an investment. Since the girl is at an age in which the child begins to enter the folklore and the culture along the roads we know, the Negro becomes the predestined depository of this aggression. If we go further into the labyrinth, we discover that when a woman lives the fantasy of rape by a Negro, it is in some way the fulfillment of a private dream, of an inner wish, accomplishing the phenomenon of turning against self. It is the woman who rapes herself. We can find clear proof of this in the fact that it is commonplace for a woman, during the sexual act, to cry to their partners, "Hurt me." They are merely expressing this idea. Hurt me as I would hurt me if I was in your place. The fantasy of rape by a Negro is a variation of this emotion. I wish the Negro would rip me open as I would have been ripped a woman open. Those who grant our conclusions on the psychosexuality of the white woman may ask what we have to say about the woman of colour. I know nothing about her. What can I offer? At the very least, is that for many women of the Antilles, the type that I shall call the all but whites, the aggressors is symbolised by the Senegalese type, or in any event, by an inferior who is so considered. The Negro is the genital. Is this the whole story? Unfortunately not. The Negro is something else. And here again we find the Jew. He, and I must say, and I may be separated by the sexual question, but we have at one point in common. Both of us stand for evil, the black man more so. So this is really examining the white man's mind. The black person and the European Jew are all the stereotypes they can think of, yeah? So both of us stand for evil, the black man more so, for the good reason that he is black. Is not whiteness in the symbols ascribed in the French to justice, truth, virginity? I knew an Antillean who said of another Antillean, his body is black, his language is black, his soul must be black too. This logic is put into deadly practice by the white man. The black man is a symbol of evil and ugliness. Henry Barak, in a recent work on psychiatry, describes what he termed the anti-Semitic psychosis. So this is a quote. In one of my patients, the vulgarity and the obscenity of his ravings transcended all that the French language could furnish and took the form of obvious pederastic allusions with which the patient deflected his intense hatred in transferring it to the scapegoat of the Jews, calling them to be slaughtered. Another patient suffered from a fit of delirium aggravated by the events of 1940s. Had such violent anti-Semitic feelings that one day in a hotel, suspecting the man in the next room to be a Jew, he broke into the room during the night and murdered him. A third patient was a physically weak constitution. He suffered from a chronic colitis, was humiliated by his poor health, and ultimately ascribed it to poisoning by means of a bacterial injection given to him by one of the male nurses in the institution where he had been earlier, nurses who were anti-clerical and communists. He said and who had wanted to be punished him for his Catholic convictions and utterances. Now that he was in our hospital and safe from a crew of Union men, he felt he was between Scylla and Charybdis, since he was in the hands of a Jew. By definition, a Jew could only be a thief, a monster, a man capable of any of all crimes. Again, we can see the strangeness of the European mind. When they have in mind their hatred for Jews or black people, they create a culture. They create evidence of their hatred, of why they hate them, of what's wrong with them. And they project this onto them, when obviously the African does not represent the sickness of their mind, which they like to project onto us. So here is all the ambiguity of that Sartre describes. Certain pages of Anti-Semite and Jew are the finest that I have ever read. The finest because the problem discussed in them grips us in our guts. The Jew, authentic and inauthentic, is struck down by the fist of the Salud. His situation is such that everything he does is bound to turn him against. Everything he does is bound to turn against him. For naturally, the Jew prefers himself. And it happens that he forgets his Jewishness, or hides it from himself. Because he has then been admitted, let me repeat that, that is because he has then admitted the validity of the Aryan system. There are good and evil. Evil is Jewish. Everything Jewish is ugly. Let us no longer be Jews. I am no longer a Jew. Down with the Jews. In such circumstances, these are the most aggressive. That the patient of Baruch, who had persecution complex and who, seeing the doctor one day wearing a yellow star, grabbed him by the lapel and shouted, "I, sir, am a Frenchman." Or this woman, making rounds in the ward of my colleague, Mr. Dade, I encountered a Jewish patient who had been the target of taunts and insults from her fellow patients. A non-Jewish patient had gone to her defense. The Jewish patient thereupon turned on the woman who had defended the Jews. Hurling every possible anti-Semitic calumny at her and demanding that the Jews be got rid of. So you can see they're saying that there's so much self-hatred was in the Jew that when a non-Jew defended him, he attacked the woman for being a Jew, because in the mind, Jewishness is everything bad. So similarly, if we add that or stretch that to the African as well, if you believe that everything black is terrible, everything to be African is terrible, you again yourself will turn against your own people, because you've been conditioned to believe that of the negativity of blackness or Africanness. This is a fine example of a reactional phenomenon. In order to react against anti-Semitism, the Jew turns himself into an anti-Semite. This is what Sartre presents in the Reprieve, in which Bernard Schwartz finally acts out his disavowal with an intensity that borders on delirium. We shall see that the word is not too strong. Americans who go to Paris are amazed to see so many white women accompanied by Negroes. In New York, Simone de Beauvoir went for a walk with Richard Wright. Richard Wright is a famous African-American author. And it was rebuked in the street by an old lady. Sartre said, "Here it is the Jew. Somewhere else is the Negro. What is essential is a scapegoat." Very good point. They like to blame things. Oh, the reason we ain't got no jobs is because of those blacks. The reason that the economy's gone terrible is because of those Jews. So people love to have to a scapegoat. Somewhere else it is the Negro. What is essential is a scapegoat. Baruch says nothing different. Release from hate complexes will be accomplished only if mankind learns to renounce the scapegoat complex. Fault, guilt, refusal of guilt, paranoia, one is back in the homosexual territory. In some, what others have described in the case of the Jew applies perfectly to that of the Negro. So let me remind you, this is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. This is Brother Jegna. We are reading Black Skins and White Masks by Frantz Fanon. Good, evil, beauty, ugliness, black, white. Such are the characteristics, periods of the phenomena that make it such an expression of D-Day and Gerard we shall call Manichaeism delirium. Seeing only one type of Negro, assimilating antisemitism to negrophobia, these seem to be the errors of analysis being committed here. Someone to whom I was talking about in this book asked me what I expected to come out of it. Ever since Sartre's decisive essays, what is literature? Originally, in situations too, literature has been committed more and more and more to its role, to its sole really contemporary task, which is to persuade the group to progress, to reflection, to mediation. This book, it is hoped, will be a mirror with which the progressive infrastructure, in which it will be possible to discern the Negro on the road to disalienation. When there is no longer a human minimum, there is no culture. No matter, it matters very little to me to know that Muntu means, excuse me, lost the page there. Okay, let me come back here. Excuse me one moment, please. I've lost my page. I'll get there in a minute. Okay, right. So, in the same way as the animus of the Antillians is always a white man, this is because of the works of Anatole France, Balzac, Bazin, and any of the rest of our novelists. There is never a word about an ethereal yet ever-present black woman or a dark Apollo with sparkling eyes. But I too am guilty. Here I am talking about Apollo. There is no help for me. I am a white man, for unconsciously I distrust what is black in me. That is the whole of my being. Okay, so he's saying there that his frame of reference is still European. When he talks about beauty, he's talking about Apollo. So he's saying that I'm hoping to see a white man himself. So he's speaking about there, obviously, what has got into the mind of the African. But let me say to you that when we go back and read the text, Apollo in the Greek world was actually an Ethiopian. Equally, who was the king of the gods? To the Greek people. These people were Ethiopians, by the way. The earliest gods were Ethiopian, and they gave them European names. I must add to you. So I'm just going to try and find my page again. What's the time now? We're going to take a short break shortly, okay? And I'll find the correct page again. So again, this is Brother Jegna. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. And I found my page here again. I found my page here again. So we'll be taking a short break shortly. Yes? Let me continue. Seeing only one type of Negroes assimilating anti-Semitism to negrophobia, these seem to be the errors of analysis being committed here. So let me move on. When there is no longer a human minimum, there is no culture. It matters very little to me to know that Muntu means power among the Bantu, or at least it might have interested me if certain details had not been held back. What use are reflections on Bantu ontology when one reads elsewhere? And there's a quote: when 75,000 black miners went on strike in 1946, the state police forced them back to work by firing on them with their rifles and charging with fixed bayonets. 25 were killed and thousands were wounded. At that time, Smuts, so South Africa we're talking about here, at that time Smuts was the head of the government and a delegate to the peace conference. So a genocidal psychopath can be at the peace conference. But this is European world we're talking about here. On farms owned by white men, the black labourers live almost like serfs. They may have their families with them, but no man is allowed to leave the farm without permission of his master. If he does so, the police are notified and is brought back by force and whipped. Under the Act for Native Administration, the Governor General, as the supreme authority, has an autocratic powers over the African. By proclamation, he may arrest and detain any African deemed dangerous to public order. He may forbid meetings of more than 10 persons at any native residential area. The writ of habeas corpus is not available to Africans. Mass arrests without warrant are made constantly. The non-white populations of South Africa are at an impasse. All of the modern modes of slavery make it impossible for them to flee from this scourge. In the case of African especially, white society has smashed his old world without giving him a new one. That's a very good quote there. He has destroyed the traditional tribal foundation of his existence, and it blocks the road to the future after having closed the road to the past. Now that's a powerful quote. Let me say that again. I've got to read that again. The non-white population of South Africa are at an impasse. All of the modern modes of slavery make it impossible for them to flee from this scourge. In the case of the African especially, white society has smashed his old world without giving him a new one. It has destroyed the traditional tribal foundations of his existence and blocks the road of the future after having closed the road of his past. So shall we analyse that? So he's saying he smashed the African world, saying that your world is no good. Africans, everything, your culture, your history is no good, without giving a new one. So he's left in limbo. He destroyed the traditional tribal foundation, so basically he destroyed African culture, or at least shredded it out of existence. But he blocks the road to the future after having closed the road to his past. So I always say, people, I'm not interested in history. I need to know about now. I need to know about the future. But if you do not have understanding of your past, you've got no future, because you're walking down the road without any. What's that tune by Ika Mouse? The road. Life is a long road with lots of signs. Our history gives us signs of where to go. If we don't know our past, we don't know where we're wandering blindly into the future. It has destroyed the traditional tribal foundations of its existence and blocks the road of the future after having closed the road of the past. Very good point. Apartheid inspires to banish the Negro from participating in modern history as a free and independent force. So what they did within the apartheid system is basically encased the African in this box of European madness. So when we see the xenophobia in Tanzania today, in South Africa today, we wonder, what is the hell wrong with these Africans? Why do they want to kill each other? It's because of this madness which has been locked in their mind, hasn't been broken free, hasn't been stomped on, hasn't been destroyed yet. So the things I read about in here, many South Africans need to understand this, because this whiteness, this self-hatred has been put into their mind. And even though they don't think about it every day, it's there. It's at the back of their mind. Someone put it to be in the back of their head, there's a little white man telling them what they should think about themselves. So apartheid aspires to banish the Negro from participating in modern world history as a free and independent force. So we have to say, you have no modern history, because we've locked you into the parallel universe, you could say, created by Europeans. I apologise for this long quotation, but it permits me to bring out some possibilities of the black man's mistakes. Alouine Diop, for example, in his introduction to the philosophies of the Bantu, so his introduction to Bantu philosophy, remarks that the Bantu ontology knows nothing of the metaphysical misery of Europe. What does metaphysical mean? Metaphysical means more than physical. So like maybe the spiritual world, yeah? Metaphysical more than physical. So the inference that he draws from this is none the less dangerous. So this is a quote from Diop. The double question that arises is to determine whether the genius of the black man should cultivate what constitutes his individuality. That youth of spirit, that innate respect for man and creation, that joy of living, that peace which is not disfigured which is not a disfigurement of man, imposed and suffered through the peace which is not imposed and suffered through the moral hygiene, but a natural harmony with the happy majesty of life. One wonders too what the Negro can contribute to the modern world. What can be said? What we can say is that the very idea of culture conceived as a revolutionary will is contrary to our genius. As to the very idea of progress, progress would have hunted our consciousness until only if we have grievances against life, which is a gift of nature. Be careful. It is not a matter of being in Bantu thought, when Bantu existence subsists on the level of non-being in the imponderable. It is quite true that Bantu philosophy is not going to open itself to the understanding, though through a revolutionary will. We repeat that. It is quite true that Bantu philosophy is not going to open itself to an understanding through a revolutionary will, but it's precisely in that degree in which the Bantu society, being a closed society, does not contain that substitution of the explorer, the exploiter, for the ontological relationships of forces. Now we know that the Bantu society no longer exists, and there is nothing ontological about segregation. Enough of this rubbish. For some time, there has been much talk about the Negro, a little too much. The Negro would like to be dropped, so that he may regroup his forces, his authentic forces. One day he said, "My negritude is neither a tower." And someone came along to Hellenize him, to make him Orpheus of him. This Negro who is looking for a universal, he's a looking for the universal. But in June 1950, the hotels of Paris refused to rent rooms to Negro pilgrims. Why? Purely and simply because they're Anglo-Saxon customers who are rich and who, everyone knows, hate Negroes, threatened to move out. The Negro is aiming for the universal, but on the screen, his Negro essence, his Negro nature is kept intact. Always a servant, always obsequious and smiling. Me never steal, me never lie, eternally show good eating. It's obviously kind of taking a joke out of Africans or black people's speech. The Negro is universalizing himself. Be it at the Lychee St. Louis in Paris, one was thrown out. He had the impudence to read on Engels. So even they're saying that when Africa tries to be educated European, it's still not respected. He's a noble savage in the European mind, and we can't get no further than that. There is drama there, and the black intellectuals are running the risk of being trapped by it. What? I have barely opened eyes that have been blindfolded, and someone already wants to drown me in the universal. What about the others? Those who have no voice, those who have no spokesman. I need to lose myself in my negritude, to see the fires, the segregations, the repressions, the rapes, the discrimination, the boycotts. We need to put our fingers on every sore that mottles the black uniform. We can already imagine Aloine Diop wondering what place the black genius will have in the universal chorus. It is my belief that the true culture cannot come to life under the present conditions. It will be time enough to talk of the black genius when the man has regained his rightful place. Very good point. Once again, I come back to Cesar. I wish that many black intellectuals would turn to him for the inspiration. So I'm going to take a short break here, people. We'll be back on the other side. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. This is Brother Jegna. We are reading Frantz Fanon's Black Skin and White Mask. We're going to take a short musical break. We'll be back on the other side.
His Majesty is coming now. His Majesty is coming now. Rejoice, rejoice. The wicked men them running now. The wicked men them running now. Rejoice, rejoice. Men make war and cause much pain. But now is no. Rejoice, rejoice. Men make war and cause much pain. But now is the time for Jah to win. Yeah, yeah. His Majesty is coming now. His Majesty is coming now. Rejoice, rejoice. Coming. He's coming. You better rejoice. Coming. Yeah, yeah. He's coming. You better rejoice. Yeah, 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 yeah. Rejoice. Coming. Coming. He's coming now. He's coming now. You better coming now. He's coming. You better Mama Africa, Mama Africa, am I coming home? Am I coming home? Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, you The sweetest things are there to be found. The golden sunshine, the wind that blows around. The fresh vegetation which comes from the earth. Oh, Mama Africa, you make me know what life is worth. Hey, hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I'm feeling fine, and I hope you're fine too. Hello, Mama Africa, how are you? I hope when you hear these words, your grace turn blue. Your
Lord boy, na 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 na, Jah Rastafari. Lord boy, na 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 na, Jah Rastafari. Na 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 na. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I face a lot of trials and tribulation, but through all of that I man still stand strong. Giving thanks and praise to the Almighty One, and looking forward to reach Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. They said I don't have no rights in a Babylon, because I don't know how the West was won. Neither I can't change their plan. The West is controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. That's why I say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Teach the youths them right, but not teach them wrong. Jackal up on the youths, cause the youths are strong. Look to Africa, that I feel your mama land. And down Africa, where you find Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Say, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I care not what the people of this world want to say, neither what the people of this world want to do. Many are called, but the chosen are few. What you gonna do when Jaja call on you? I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Oh, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I've faced a lot of trials and tribulation, but through all of that I man still stand strong. Still giving praise to the Almighty One, and looking forward to reach Mount Zion. And I man say, Zion, I'm coming home to you. The bingy man him says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. They said I don't have no rights in a Babylon, because I don't know how the West was won. Neither I can't change their plan. The West is controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. Rastaman Zion, I'm coming home to you. Oh, Rasta says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. One more time, Holy Mount Zion, I'm coming home to you. I cannot what the people of this world want to say, neither what the people of this world want to do. Many are called, the chosen of few. What you gonna do when Jaja call on you? Rastaman says, Zion, I'm coming home to you. Holy Mount Zion.
Yes, I'll be back on the other side of this quick musical break. Hope you enjoyed those tunes. Always played classical music for you. Right, so this is Brother Jegna here. This is the Afrocentricity Book Show. Please don't forget to tell your family and friends every Sunday between 4 and 6. We read the best books, the best literature, best essays, speeches. But the key thing is we read it through the eyes of our own through the eyes of African people, from the perspective of black people. We read everything and see if it's in line with our culture, in line with our values, in line with our history, in line with our ethos. If it's not, we reject it. So it's very important that we know how to analyze things. Afrocentricity gives you a philosophy you can use in everyday life. If I want to go and spend some money, for example, where am I going to go to give my money to? I'm going to look for some black people to give my money to first. If I'm reading a newspaper and I hear some politicians talking some stuff, particularly about people of colour, I'm not going to take it for read. I'm going to go to do my own analysis. It's very important we analyse everything from our own perspective. People say many different things, but actions speak louder than words. I'm sure you know. Many people say many different things. We need to, words is really like, if you think of like a bullfighter, and you got a matador, and he's fighting a bull, and he holds up the red cape to the bull, and because of the red cape, the bull can't see the matador clearly. So when people hold up all these things to us, oh, we do this, we got courts, and we got democracy, and we got laws. These things are just a red cape to us. We cannot see the truth. They do say, just before the bull dies, he doesn't see the cape anymore, he sees the bullfighter. But it's too late then, isn't it? It's too late when he's just about to die. So we need to open our eyes and see what's happening around us before it's too late for us, while we're still strong. So we need Afrocentricity and like African-centered thought so we can analyse everything we come into contact. Wherever we see, everything we touch, everything we hear. It's very important that we Africanise our world. So let me just say that this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. You can get Glass Are Us at 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15. You can get the Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. That is Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. So let me remind you that we've got a couple of things happening in the coming weeks. First of all, on the 19th of October, our Legacy are putting on their October fundraising quiz night. So this is the Britain's best black quiz, by the way. Okay, so it's between 7 and 10:30, and it's held at Prospect Hall, 28 Prospect Road, Woodford, 1G8 7NA. And so it's just a little 5-minute walk from Woodford Tube Station on the Central Line. So it's teams of 6, £10 a ticket. So you need to phone in, you need to book your ticket and transfer money for your team. It's really a great night. You get hot food, you get some beautiful food and some drink as well. And prizes are given out on the night, awards for first, second, third, and also some great quizzes. So our sponsors gives us some many different things you can see on the night. So you can raffle tickets as well. But it's all to raise money. We're raising money for Jamaican Teaching Children, which is a charity in Jamaica. And the sister raised a lot of money and her team, and they're going to schools to educate the children. So it's an excellent quiz night. Yeah. So also, I must remind you that on the 20th, so the following day, Sunday the 20th of October, at the Ma'at Centre, 366A High Road, Tottenham, N17 9HT. We are grateful and very happy and very proud to welcome Dr. Malefi Ketiasanti and Dr. Amamazama. So these are two of our leading scholars, intellectuals from the USA, and they're coming over here for one night only to do 2 lectures on that evening. So Dr. Asanti will be talking about Afrocentricity and the African mind, and Dr. Amamazama, who is also a Mambo, that is a Voodoo priest, she'll be speaking about the power of African spirituality. So again, this is at the Ma'at Centre, the 20th, Sunday the 20th, at 7 to 10 o'clock, and the Ma'at Centre is 366A High Road, Tottenham, London N17 9HT. So these are unmissable events, yeah? We sit at the feet of these master teachers and learn a great deal of information from them. Okay, so I'm going to continue now with Frantz Fanon. I think I said to you before, Frantz Fanon is an intellectual, and like many of the intellectuals, they write some of the concepts and ideas they use are concepts because basically some of the intellectuals are writing to each other. So some of this stuff is a bit deep. Some of it is a bit deep to me to understand. But we will get to the bare bones, and I'll break it down as best I can so we get a good understanding of what's going on here. Yeah. But the idea of black skin, white mouths is to examine the mind. Obviously, he's examining the European mind as well, and the Europeans got some serious worries in their minds, which they impose onto us. But the key thing is to examine the mind of a black person when he's been trapped within the definitions and the control of the Eurocentric thought. So I continue. Once again, I come back to César. So Aimé Césaire was the writer. He created a concept called negritude. So it was a fight back against European colonialism. Obviously, say Europeans are superior and Africans are not. So he created the concept of negritude to say that us Africans, we've got a great deal of culture that you should respect. So once again, I come back to César. I wish that many black intellectuals would turn to him for the inspiration. So negritude is a kind of maybe a weaker form of Afrocentricity. The idea is that we must be proud of who we are and we must examine the world from our own perspective. And any more than anything, my body as well, my soul. I do not allow yourself to cross your arms like a sterile spectator, for life is not a spectacle. For a sea of sorrows is not a stage. For a man who cries out is not a dancing bear. Continuing to take stock of reality, endeavouring to ascertain the instance of symbolic crystallization, I am very naturally found myself on the threshold of a Jungian psychology. European civilization is characterized by the presence, at the heart of what Jung calls the collective unconsciousness, of an archetype, an expression of the bad instincts, of dark inherent in every ego, of the uncivilized savage, the Negro who slumbers in every white man. And Jung claims to have found in uncivilized people, the same psychic structure that his diagram portrays. Personally, I believe that Jung has deceived himself. Moreover, all the people that he has known, whether the Pueblo Indians of Arizona or the Negroes of Kenya in British East Africa, have had more or less traumatic contacts with the white man. I said earlier that in his Salvinizations, the young Antillians is never black, and I have tried to show what this phenomenon corresponds to. Jung locates the collective unconscious in the inherited cerebral matter. But the collective unconscious, without our having to fall back onto the genes, is purely and simply the sum of prejudices, myths, and collective attitudes of a given group. It is taken for granted to illustrate that the Jews who have settled in Israel will produce in less than 100 years a collective unconscious different from the ones that they held before 1945 in the countries in which they were forced to leave. On the level of philosophic discussion, this would be a place to bring up the old problems of instinct and habit, which is inborn. We know how we must view this innateness, an invariable specific habit, which is acquired. On this level, one would only to demonstrate that Jung has confused instinct and habit. In his view, excuse me, lost the page there. On the level of a philosophic discussion, this will be the place to bring up the old problem of instinct and habit. It's instinct. Instinct, which is inborn, we know that we must view the innateness. Invariable specific habit, which is acquired. On this level, we would have only to demonstrate that Jung is confused. I hope to have shown that nothing of the sort is the case, and that in fact the collective unconsciousness is cultural, which means acquired, just as a young mountaineer in the Carpathians to develop a mydexemia. So a Negro like René Marin, who lived in France and breathed and eaten the myths and prejudice of racist Europe, and assimilated the collective unconsciousness of that Europe, will be able, if he stands outside of himself, to express only his hatred of the Negro. Good. So I hope you all understood that. He says that this person, René Morin, he has lived in France and he's breathed and eaten the myths and prejudices of a racist Europe and assimilated them into his collective unconsciousness of that type of Europe. He will be able, if he could stand outside of himself, he will express hatred to his own self because you become indoctrinated. One must move softly, and there the whole drama in having to lay bare, little by little, the workings and processes that are seen in their totality. Will this statement be susceptible of understanding? In Europe, the black man is a symbol of evil. One must move softly. I know, but it is not. It is not easy. The torturer is the black man. Satan is the black. One talks of shadows. When one is dirty, one is black. Whether one is thinking of physical dirtiness or moral dirtiness. Excuse me. And I'll keep it doing this to my page. Everything that is opposite of the Negro modes of behavior is white. This must be recognized as a source of negrophobia in the Antillian and in the collective. Excuse me, I just had to cough there. In order for my life to be like a moral man, I simply am not a Negro. Hence, the Martinican, a custom of saying of a worthless white man that he has a nigger soul. Colour is nothing. I do not even notice it. I only notice one thing, which is the purity of my consciousness and the whiteness of my soul. Me, white as snow, the other said. Cultural imposition is easily accomplished in Martinique. The ethical transit encounters no obstacle. But the real white man is waiting for me. As soon as possible, he'll tell me. He will tell me what it is that it's not enough to try to be white, but that white totality must be achieved. It is only then that I shall recognize the betrayal. Let us conclude. An Antillian is made white by the collective unconscious, by a large part of his individual unconscious, and by the virtual totality of his mechanisms. So again, the concept here is that because the white image, the white symbolism is perfect, it's pure, it's honest, it's clean, it's intellectual, it's rich, basically it's everything good, the African is the opposite. So again, when in your mind you do not have any alternative to this rubbish, then you create phobias and neurosis in your mind, which is kind of natural for us to happen. So let me try and get the page back here again. Moral consciousness implies a kind of schism, a fracture of consciousness into a bright part and the opposing black part. In order to achieve morality, it's essential that the black, the dark, the Negro vanish from consciousness. Hence, a Negro is forever in combat with his own image. So I hope you all listen to this, what is input part into our mind. I'm sure you've all seen, you should all Google it, guys, my apologies. Go to YouTube, put in black doll, white doll test. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but they get these young children, black children, and they put these dolls in front of them, a black doll and a white doll. And they say to them, give me the ugly doll. Give me the beautiful doll. Give me the good doll. Give me the black doll. Give me the doll that you like to play with. Give me the doll who's naughty. And 8 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10, the child will pick up all the negative ideas about the black child. When it was about the negative connotations, the child will pick up the black doll. And then, at the end, the person says, what colour are you? And you see some of the children hesitate, because they're thinking like the hand's dying, like they want to go to the white doll. And you see them hesitate, and then they pick the bad doll. And that's when it kind of hits them. All the negative stuff they've been saying is about themselves. It's really sad to watch. But this book is explaining what happens. It's put into our mind from we can understand these things, that our skin, our genes, our blood, everything's terrible. And whiteness, that's what we must kind of try to be like. That is our goal. If in like manner one allows M. Hensner these scientific conceptions of the moral life, and if the world of a moral sickness is to be understood by starting from fault and guilt, a normal person will be one who has freed himself of the guilt, or one, in any case, who has managed to submit or not submit to it. More directly, each individual has to charge the blame for his baser drives, his impulses, to the account of an evil genius, which is that of the culture to which he belongs. And we have seen that this is the Negro. This collective guilt is borne by what is conventionally called the scapegoat. Now, the scapegoat for white society, which is based on myths of progress and civilization, liberalism, education, enlightenment, and refinement, will be precisely the force that opposes the expansion and the triumph of these myths. The brutal opposing force is supplied by the Negro. In the society of the Antilles, where the myths are identical with those of the society of Dijon and Nice, the young Negro identify himself with the civilizing power will make the nigger the scapegoat of his moral life. And imagine if you're a black person, you're scapegoat to yourself. I was 14 years old when I began to understand the meaning of what I now called a cultural imposition. I had an acquaintance, now dead, whose father was an Italian, had married a Martitian, now dead. This man had lived in Fort-de-France for more than 20 years. He was considered an Antillean, but underneath his origin was always remembered. Now in France, from a military point of view, an Italian is despised. One Frenchman is the equal of 10 Italians. The Italians have no guts. So let me interject here. You see this, guys, that even though we look at them as all Europeans have got their own prejudice. As you may well know, that the British hate the French and the French hate the British. They're just saying here, the French hate the Italians. To them, this is like 1940s, 1950s. Fallon is writing about. The French believe that 10 Italians is worth one Frenchman. So you see, they've all got hatred of each other, and that's why we had these wars, yeah? However, when they're going to fight people of colour, they'll come together. Do you see what happened in Libya? The British, the French, and others came together to bomb the hell out of the country, to bomb the country back to the Stone Ages. Because they'll come together when they can unite around the thing. So we, as black people, need to unite around what we got in common. And what is that? Our history, our culture, who we are, our values. It's not hard. We need to come together. But the thing is, we must come together in love. These people come together for hatred. They come together to destroy. But we're not going to do that. We're going to come together to build things. Because our ancestors used to say, we must always build for eternity, which means our children as well. We must build for eternity. So he said he was considered Antillean. So he speaks about here, my acquaintance was Italian, but for French, the Italians have no guts. My acquaintance had been born in Martinique, and he associated only with Martinicans. On the day Montgomery routed the Italian army at Benghazi, I wanted to mark the Allies' victory on the map. Measuring the substantial advance of the lines, I could not help exulting. So he kind of said this out loud, no doubt. We really murdered them. My acquaintance was not aware of his father's origin, who was not unaware of his father's origin, so basically he knew he's Italian, was extremely embarrassed. For that matter, so was I. Both of us were victims of the cultural imposition. So I hope you understand that, yeah? The culture you live in or the culture you are influenced by imposes itself onto you, and you accept their norms, you accept their definitions without even thinking. Remember, this is unconscious. So when we see some of our youths who want to fight each other, cultural imposition, they've been indoctrinated, they've been commissioned, they're conditioned to think a certain way. I am convinced that anyone who has grasped this phenomenon and all its consequences will know exactly in what direction to look for the solution. Listen to the rebel of Cesar. So it's a quote. It is rising. It is rising from the depths of the earth. The black tide is rising. Waves of cries, bogs of animal odors, the raging storm of naked feet. The paths of the cliffs are teeming with more. They clamber down the sides of ravines, where obscene savage torrents pour impregnation into the chaotic rivers. Seas of corruption, oceans of convulsions, amid a black laughter of knives and bad alcohol. So that's poetry of Cesar. Do you understand? Cesar has come down. He is ready up to see what is happening at the very depths. And now he can go up. He is ripe for the dawn. But he does not leave the black man there. He lifts him up on his shoulders and raises him to the clouds. Powerful. Earlier in Kaya, d'un retour au pays natal, I cannot reach French as you can see, he had prepared us. What he has chosen is to use the expression of Gaston Bachelard, a psychic of accent. So this is poetry of Cesar, I believe. Let's have a read. And for this, O Lord, with white teeth, men of fragile necks, received and collect fatal calm triangular. And for me, my dances, my bad nigger dances. For me, my dances, break the yoke dances, jailbreak dance. It is fine and good and right to be a Negro dance. For me, my dances, and let the sun bounce off the racket of my hands. No unjust sun is no longer enough for me. Twist yourselves, wind round my new growth, touch my space fingers. I give you my consciousness and its rhythm of flesh. I give you the flames that charm my weakness. I give you the chain gang. I give you the swamp. I give you the in-tourist with the free-cornered journey, devour wind. I give you my rugged lips, devour and twist yourself, and twist and clasp me in the great shiver. Embrace me into the fury of us. Embrace us, but biting us as well, into the blood of our blood-bitten embrace. My purity has no bound but your purity. But then embrace, in a field of measured philos, the evening, our many-coloured purities, and bind me without remorse. Bind me with your great arms of the glowing clay. Bind my black vibration to the very navel of the world. Bind the bitter brotherhood. Then, strangling me with your lasso of stars, rise, dove, rise, rise, rise. I follow you, who are imprinted with my ancestral white cornea. Rise, glutton of the sigh, and the vast black hole where I wanted to drown myself, the other moon. There now I want to haul out the evil tongue of the night in this moveless glaze. Okay, that's kind of pretty powerful poetry there. So that's Cesar. So do our children learn this stuff at school? Very unlikely. One can understand why Sartre, but let me just interject there. This is why we need to get all this poetry, all this arts inside our house ourselves. We cannot rely on other people to educate our children. We need to Africanize our houses, books, statues, videos, fabrics, materials, artwork. We need to do it ourselves. One can understand why Sartre views the adoption of a Marxist position by black poets as a logical conclusion of Negrohood. In effect, what happens is this. As I begin to recognize that the Negro is a symbol of sin, I catch myself hating the Negro, but then I recognize that I am a Negro. There are two ways out of this conflict. Either I ask others to pay no attention to my skin, or else I want them to be aware of it. I try then to find the value of try the value for what is bad, since I have unthinkingly conceded that the black man is bad. Oh, the black man is the colour of evil. In order to terminate this neurotic situation, in which I am compelled to choose an unhealthy, conflictual solution, fed on fantasies, hostile, inhuman in short, I have only one solution: to rise above this absurd drama that others have staged around me, to reject the two terms that are equally unacceptable, and, through one human being, to reach out for the universal. Where the Negro dives, in other words, goes under, something remarkable occurs. Listen again to Cesar. Ho, ho, their power is well anchored, gained, needed. My hands bathe in a bright heather, in swamps of anato trees. My gourd is heavy with stars, but I am weak. Oh, I am weak. Help me. And here I am on the edge of a metamorphosis, drowned, blinded, frightened of myself, terrified of myself, of the gods. You are no gods. I am free. I have a pact with this night of 20 years. I have heard it calling me softly. Having again discovered that night, which is to say, the sense of his identity, Cesar learned, first of all, that it is no use painting. The foot of the tree white, the strength of the bark cries out from beneath the paint. Then once he had laid there with the white man in himself, he killed him. And there's a quote here. We broke down the doors. The master's room was wide open. The master's room was brilliantly lighted, and the master was there, quiet, calm. And we stopped. He was the master. I entered. It is you? He said to me, quite calmly. It was I. It was indeed I. I told him, the good slave, the faithful slave, the Slavish slave, and suddenly his eyes were two frightened cockroaches on a rainy day. I struck. The blood flowed. That is the only baptism that I remember today. I quite like that. Okay. Cesar. I think we all need to get Cesar and read Cesar. Poetry, stories. After an unexpected and solitary eternal revolution, he now paid tribute to his own revolting ugliness. What more is there to add? After having driven himself to the limit of self-destruction, the Negro is about to leap, whether deliberately or impetuously, into the black hole, from which will come the great Negro cry with such force that the pillars of the world will be shaken by it. I must remind you, this is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. This is Brother Jegler. We are reading Black Skin and White Mask by Frantz Fanon. The European knows, and he does know, on the level of reflection, a Negro is a Negro, but in the unconscious there is the firmly fixed image of the nigger savage. I could not a dozen of but 1,000 illustrations. I could give not a dozen but 1,000 illustrations. Georges Munin said in Présence Africaine, I had a good luck not to discover the Negroes through Lévi-Brul's mentality, primitive. So, not that primitive mentality. Read in a sociology course. More broadly, I had the good luck to discover the Negroes otherwise than through books, and I am grateful for it every day. Monin, whom it would be impossible to take for an average Frenchman, added, and thus rose inestimably in my opinion, I profited perhaps by learning at an age when one's mind has not been prejudiced that Negroes are men like ourselves. I, as a white man, thus gained, perhaps, the possibility of always being natural with a Negro and never in a presence, to fall stupidly and imperceptibly into the attitude of ethnographic investigator. That is still too often our unbearable manner in putting them in their place. In the same issue of the Présence Africaine, Emily Dermanen who cannot be accused of negrophobia, said, "One of my childhood memories is the visit to the World's Fair of 1900, which my chief enthusiasm was to see a Negro. My imagination had naturally been stimulated by my reading of Captain Da Quince, a captain of 15, and Les Adventures, Robert's Adventures, and also Livingstone's Travels. Der Mengem tells us that this was the manifestation of his taste for the exotic. While I may be prepared to put my two hands into his, and believe that Der Mengen, who wrote the article, I asked for his permission to entertain doubts about Der Mengens in the 1900s fair. I should be annoyed with myself if I was simply picking up old subjects that had been worked dry for 50 years. To write about the chances of a Negro friendship is an unselfish undertaking, but unfortunately the Negrophobes and other princes and the other prince consorts are impregnable to unselfishness. When we read The Negro is a Savage, and to lead savages there's only one method, a kick in the butt, we sit at our desks and we think that all such idiocies will have to die out, but everyone is in agreement on that. To quote President Africans 5 again, Jacques Howlett wrote, "Two things, furthermore, it seems, contributed to the aversion towards the Negro in the world of the other, which are impossible for me to comprehend. The colour of his skin and his nakedness. For I picture the Negro naked. Certainly, superficial factors, although one cannot be sure to what extent they continue to haunt our new ideas and our altered conceptions, could sometimes mask that remote black and naked being, almost non-existent, such as the nice Negro with the Red Army tarboosh and the infinite Fernandel, like a grin, the symbol of some chocolate confection, or the brave Senegalese Pui Pui Pui, a slave to his orders, Don Quixote without glory, a good fellow hero. With all that stems the epic of the empire of the Negro, waiting for salvation, the submissive child, or a bearded missionary." Further on, Jacques Howlett tells us that as a reaction, he made the Negro his symbol of innocence. He tells us of the reason why. But we have to remember that he was no longer 8 years old. For he speaks of a bad conscience about sexuality, about solipsism. I am convinced, however, as far as that innocence has grown for a grown man is concerned, that Jacques Howlett has left it far, far behind. Beyond all question, the most interesting testimony is presented by Michel Salmon. Although he defends himself against the charge, he stinks of racism. He is a Jew, he has a millennial experience of anti-Semitism, and yet he's a racist. Listen to him. But to say that the fact of his skin, of his hair, of that aura, of sensuality, that he, this is a Negro, gives off. He does not spontaneously give rise to a certain embarrassment, whether of attraction or of revulsion, is to reject the facts in the name of the ridiculous prudery that he has never solved anything. Later he goes to the extreme of telling us about the prodigious vitality of the black man. Mr. Salamon's study informs us that he is a physician. He should be wary of those literary points or views that are unscientific. The Japanese and the Chinese are 10 times more prolific than the Negro. Does that make them sensual? In addition, M. Salomon, I have confessions to make to you. I have never been able without revulsion to hear a man say of another man, "He is so sensual." I do not know what the sensuality of a man is. Imagine a woman saying to another woman, "She is so terribly desirable, she's darling." The Negro, Mr. Salomon, gives off an aura of sensuality either through his skin or through his hair. It is just over a series of long days and long nights the image of the biological, sexual, sensual, genital nigger has imposed himself on you. And you do not know how to get free of it. The eye is not merely a mirror, but it's a correcting mirror. The eye should make it possible for us to connect cultural errors. But I do not say the eyes, I say the eye. And there is no mystery about what the eye refers to. Not the crevice in the skull, but to that very uniform light that wells out of the red of Van Gogh, that glides through the concerns of Tchaikovsky, that fastens itself desperately to Schiller's Ode to Joy, that allows itself to be conveyed by the worn rhythm balling of César. The Negro's problem does not resolve itself into the problems of Negroes living among the white man, but rather the Negroes exploited, enslaved, despised by the colonist. Capitalist society that is only accidentally white. You wonder, M. Solomon, what you must do? If you had 800,000 Negroes in France, because there is a problem. The problem is the increase in Negroes. The problem is the black peril. The Martitian is a Frenchman. He wants to remain part of France, the French Union. He asks only one thing. He wants the idiots and the exploiters to give him the chance to live like a human being. I can manage myself lost, submerged in a white flood of composed men. Composed of men like Sartre and Aragon. I should like nothing better. You say, M. Salomon, that there is nothing to be gained by caution? And I share your view, but I do not feel that I should be abandoning my personality by marrying a European, whoever she might be. I can tell you that I am making no fool's bargains. If my children are suspected, if the crescents of their fingernails are inspected, it will simply be because society will not have changed. Because you will as you so well put it, society will have kept its mythology intact. For my part, I refuse to consider the problem from the standpoint of either or. What is all this talk of black people, the Negro nationality? I am a Frenchman. I am interested in France, in French culture, French civilization, the French people. We refuse to be considered outsiders. We have a full part in the French drama. When men who are not basically bad, only deluded, invaded France in order to subjugate her, my position as a Frenchman made it plain to me that my place was not outside, but in the very heart of the problem. I am personally interested in the future of France, in French values, in the French nation. What have I to do with the Black Empire? Georges Mounin, Derham Jen, Howlett and Salomon have all tried to find answers to the questions of the origin of the myth of the Negro, and all of them have convinced us of one thing. It is that the authentic grasp of the reality of the Negro should be achieved only to the detriment of the cultural crystallization. Recently, in a children's paper, I read a caption to a picture in which a young black boy, a scout, was showing a Negro village to 3 or 4 white scouts. This is the kettle where my ancestors cooked yours. One will gladly concede that there are no more Negro cannibals, but we should not allow ourselves to forget. Quite seriously, however, I think that the writer of that caption has done a genuine service to the Negroes without knowing it. For the white child who reads it will not form a mental picture of the Negro in the act of eating white men, but rather of having eaten him. Unquestionably, this is progress. Frantz Fanon's humour there. Before concluding this chapter, I would like to abstract a case study for access to which I must think of a medical director of the Women's Division of the Psychiatric Hospital in St. Yali. The case clarifies a point. In view of what I'm defending here, it proves that, at the extreme, the myth of the Negro, the idea of the Negro, can become the divisive factor of authentic alienation. Milby was 19 years old, and when she entered hospital on March, her mission for sheet read, "The undersigned Dr. P, formerly on the staff of the Hospital of Paris, certifies that he examined Milby, who is afflicted with a nervous disease consisting of periods of agitation, motor instability, tics and spasms, which are conscious, but which she cannot control. These symptoms have been increasing and prevent her from leading a normal social life. Her commitment to observation is required under the provisions laid down by the law of 1838 regarding involuntary commitments. 24 hours later, the chief physician found these facts, afflicted with neurotic tics, and began at the age of 10, and became aggravated at the onset of puberty. And further, when she began going to work away from home, intermittent depressions with anxiety accompanied by a recrudescence of the symptoms. With anxiety, obesity, requests treatment, feels reassured in company, assigned to an open ward, should remain institutionalized. Her immediate family had no history of pathological manifestations. Puberty occurred at the age of 16. A physical examination showed nothing except antiposity and a minimal epidermal indication of a slight endocrine insufficiency. Her menstrual periods were irregular. In an interview made it possible to isolate these details. It is especially when I am working that the tics come. The patient who was working at the job that entailed her leaving away from home, the tics affected the eyes and the forehead. She panted and yelped. She kept quite well, without nightmares, and ate well. She was not out of sorts during menstruation. When she went to bed, the facial tics were constant until she fell asleep. The observation of the ward nurse: it is the worst when she is alone and when she is talking with others or merely with them. It is no less noticeable. The tic depends on what she is doing. She begins by tapping both her feet and then goes on to raise her feet, her legs, her arms, her shoulders, symmetrically. She uttered sounds. It was never possible to understand what she was saying. The manifestations ended in quite loud, inarticulate cries. As soon as she was spoken to, these stopped. The psychiatrist in charge decided to employ waking dream therapy. A preliminary interview had brought out the existence of hallucinations in the form of terrifying circles, and the patient had been asked to describe them. Here is an excerpt from the notes on her first session. Deep and concentric, the circles expanded and contracted to the rhythm of a Negro tom-tom. The tom-tom made the patient think of the danger of losing her parents, especially her mother. I then asked her to make the sign of a cross over these circles, but they did not disappear. I told her to take a cloth and rub them out, and they vanished. She turned in the direction of the tom-toms. She was surrounded by half-naked men and women dancing in a frightening way. I told her not to be afraid to join the dance. She did. Immediately, the appearance of the dancers changed. It was a splendid party. The men and women were all well dressed. They were dancing in a waltz, a snow star. I told her to get closer to the circles. She could no longer see them. I told her to think of them. They appeared, but they were broken. I told her to go through the opening. I'm not completely surrounded by it anymore. She said spontaneously, I can get out. The circles broke into two pieces, and then into several. Soon there was only 2 pieces, and they then disappeared. There was frequent throat and eye ticks while she was talking. A succession of such sessions will bring about the sedation of the motor disturbance. Here are the notes on another session. I told her to bring back the circles. She could not see them at first, and then they came. They were broken. She entered them. They broke, rose again, and then gently, one after another, they fell away into the void. I told her to listen to the tom-toms. She did not hear it. She called it. She heard it on the left. I suggested to her that the angel would go with her to the tom-toms. She waited to go alone, but someone was coming down from the sky. It was the angel. He was smiling. He took her close to the tom-toms. There was only black men there, and they were dancing around a large fire and looked evil. The angel asked what they were doing to her, what they were going to do. She said they were going to burn a white man. She looked for him everywhere. She could not see him. Ah, I see him. He's a white man, about 50 years old, and he's half undressed. The angel began to negotiate with the black chief, for she was afraid. The black chief said that this white man was not from the country, and so they were not going to burn him. They were going to burn him, but he had done nothing wrong. They set him free and went back to their dancing. Joyfully, she refused to take part in the dance. I sent her to talk to the chief. He was dancing alone. The white man had disappeared. She wanted to go away and seemed to have no desire to know the Negroes. She wanted to go away with the angel, somewhere where she could really be at home with her mother, her brothers, her sisters. When the tics had ceased, the treatment was dropped. A few days later, the patient was seen again. She had a relapse, and these were the notes of that session. The circles kept coming. She hit them with a stick. They broke into fragments. The stick was magic, a wand. It changed these bits of iron into something better, shining and beautiful. She turned towards the fire. It was a fire around which the Negroes were dancing. She wanted to know the chief, and she approached him. One Negro who had stopped dancing started again, but in a new rhythm. She danced around the fire and let the Negroes take their hands. Her hands. These sessions have clearly improved her condition. She writes to her parents, receives visits, goes to film showings on the hospital. She takes part in group games. Now, and some other patient plays waltz on the piano the other day. This patient asked others to dance with her. She's popular and respected among other patients. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to continue to do this next week again. We're on page 161, so we'll come back to page 161. So please remember, what you think about yourselves depends on what you know about yourself, and what you know about yourself depends on what you've been taught about yourselves. And what you've been taught about yourself, oftentimes, is from somebody else. So when we educate ourselves, it shapes the way we think about ourselves, because it shapes what we know about ourselves. So the Afrocentricity show is about our education and seeing the world through our own eyes. So have a great week. I shall catch you again next Sunday, I should say. Please tell your friends, 4 to 6 o'clock, yeah? So this is Brother Jegna checking out. Have a great week.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now. Storms will come and storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love, and some will die.
Some shall
But
die.
they're in heaven, so dry your eyes.
Dry your eyes.
Celebrate life.
Don't you cry.
Jump for joy.
Jump for joy.
Like a baby with a toy.
Little baby.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Dry your eyes.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Don't you cry.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Wake up.